Hello and welcome to Economic Times BFSI.com. My name is Amol Dethe and you're watching FinTech Diary. In the episode of FinTech Diary, I have with me Monica Jasuja, a lady who's leading the FinTech world actually. She's a FinTech expert, deals with a lot of FinTech all over the world and going to tell us how the FinTechs in India and all over the world actually are shaping up. So let's take her expert view. Monica, glad to have you on this show.
Thank you so much.
So to begin with, my first question is: we have seen thousands of fintechs emerging in India right now. Many of them, actually, in dozens, are unicorns, and many of them are actually unicorns. We raised more than $25 billion last year, and which was actually lower than what we raised earlier. So, which means that the Indian fintechs are in the top line, and the top in the list. But how the world looks at Indian fintechs today, because you travel around the world and you speak with a lot of regulators, fintechs around the world. So how do they see India right now?
So, the India growth story is something that we have been phenomenal at being able to communicate to the world. When we talk in terms of billions, sometimes, in fact, not all the time, there's one question that we hear back: are you talking in billions? People cannot understand the scale and the impact that India has been able to create in the last 5 years, in particular. Since UPI launched, even UPI as a growth story was something that was unexpected. The UPI movement, or that pivotal movement and that hockey stick, is something nobody has ever seen in payments for, I would say, about 20 to 30 years. So I've been part of the first new age fintech that ever existed, which is PayPal, and it continues to be breaking new ground all the time. The one thing that I learned in my journey has been that in the last 20 years, many markets came up as areas of opportunity, China being the first, followed by LATAM. India was never really one of an opportunity market, but suddenly UPI and what NPCI has done suddenly changed and swung the pendulum towards India as a growth opportunity. Now, I think when we talk about India as a market, we overlook the fact that India has just a huge population, digitally connected consumers, mobile first consumers. But what people don't realize is there's also money to be made. And I think that is where the questions come from. You've talked about the India growth story, but the innovation is happening because of NPCI. The disruption is happening because of the regulator. The government plays a very important role. So what are the fintechs doing? So one very pertinent question that everybody outside is asking is, what are the fintechs doing, and what innovation or growth stories and transformative leadership can we expect from India? Can India lead the world in fintech, not just in terms of number and value of transactions, but in terms of innovation? And I think we don't do a very good job of talking about the India story from a transformation perspective. Because let's be very honest, all of us are here because we are in a capitalist society. We're all here to make money. There aren't very good examples from India which have made money, which have made the news. And I think that's that one change that we need from India. Because once businesses start making a lot of money, suddenly India becomes not just an opportunity market, it becomes a market to realize business potential.
Exactly. Uh, so the journey, or maybe the beginning and whatever, wherever the fintechs are today, they started with raising lots of funds and perhaps building the business itself, and they did not look at the profitability, which now they started looking at it. Uh, but again, world is very clear that what kind of value are we building. But looking at the current trend, specifically after the funding winter, specifically few of the companies became profitable. Do you see that trend changing right now, or we are still in a FOMO mode that I want to be part of fintechs, I will do a growth story, I will do this and I will do that, but actually on the paper there is no value?
That's such an amazing question, because I actually have been part of two fintechs and I've seen the downturn happen in front of my eyes. The questions start getting asked about path to profitability when suddenly the business cases are being questioned, and you start examining financial statements to be able to really look at the health of the business in terms of the overall profitability after tax. When you start talking about PAT and EBITDA, you know that your company is heading towards a direction where growth story has now changed into a path to profitability story. So this transformation that has happened has been very slow in the last 1.5 years. But suddenly now, that because everybody was expecting that 2024 will be the change, it actually never happened. And now we are in this phase where fintechs are examining, do we need to build this? And I think that is a very big difference, because you don't keep building and disrupting the market, and in terms of Me Too's and Me Threes and Me Fours. Now only the biggest and the best players survive, which is at the back of technology, and I would say compliance. I think one thing that we normally forget especially also in India, is that we've learned the very hard way that compliance by design should be built into the product. And what we've done is we've innovated, and then the regulator has gotten hold of what they feel are unscrupulous practices because they impact consumers, and then regulations come in. So it's very easy to blame regulation, but in the Indian market environment, being compliant should always be a P0 item, not a P4 item to be picked up. And I think that too changes the part to profitability, and the compliance by design is something that I've started observing in all fintechs. So I consult some fintechs as well. I always tell them, before you hire a chief product officer, a CISO, a chief security officer, risk officer, please hire a firm which does your legal and compliance so that you know where you stand. Because even if you outsource this function, this is probably like the P0 item for you, not for today, but for the long term.
Interesting points, Monica. But let me again, learn more from you and understand the current picture. How fintechs learned that lessons? Because we are sitting here at the Global FinTech Festival, where thousands of fintechs are part of this, journey. Which sounds really good that India has put up this, large festival. But how many of them will actually make a value? How many of them will actually develop a great product which will generate a business value? Do you see some change, or we are still in that, dream phase?
I actually feel that the reporting about GFF has all been about the numbers. Like India is always about the numbers, the scale, the billions and the millions and the thousands. I wish India was talked about in terms of innovation. And every year we have product showcases, product innovation launches. But sad to say that, but the media and of course all of us are to be blamed for that as well. Perhaps we're not selling that story well. That's number one. And number two, I have to admit that it's a good and a bad thing. It's a problem of plenty. We're so used to things becoming of scale that even small changes, when they happen, we tend to overlook them and brush them under the carpet, thinking, ye to hona hi tha, which is a normal way of saying that this was expected to happen because you're so used to big things being achieved. But that's unfortunate, because I'll give an example. The regulator is one of the most progressive in the world. When they lay down a regulation which is followed across the world in terms of a playbook, then you know you're doing the right thing. But when we comply with regulation, we always think about the product build as a security compliance build that we released. That's unfortunate, because these security compliances that you're building in today are going to be copied by the world in terms of how they build compliance into their products. So I feel that we are celebrating the thousands, billions of apps download and
Exactly,
transactions.
exactly.
We're not celebrating what we are building out. And this is where I think the fintechs do a great job. These kind of festivals really help bring out and showcase the innovation that is coming on top of the infra layer. So it's very clear that in India now, the infra is something which is going to be a digital public good, and everybody innovates on top of it. But even the innovation on top of it, is it customer centric? Is it solving for financial inclusion? Is it solving for the business? There has to be money to be made for all participants. And I think that change we are suddenly seeing, because also you're seeing by the participation of the kind of fintechs, suddenly from lending, we are now going back into basics, which I would say are more of the B2B or the B2B2C businesses, which are either in fraud, cyber security, KYC compliance, and AML, which suddenly have become again super hot. And the second thing would be taking India to the world. I see a lot of great use cases that can be plug and play models for the rest of the world, because India solved for it first. Yes, we are fortunate enough to have a digital public infrastructure that we can actually use. But what if somebody was to build it out for themselves? India can help partake, but then the use cases that India has built out can be really helpful. So I feel that the success stories that India has should be showcased in festivals like this, where people are invited, they're curious, and then they get excited.
So noted your point. So a couple of fintechs are actually trying to go abroad, specifically, global south, or specifically the Southeast Asian countries. But Monica, I would really like to learn, when we speak about the plugin models, because the geographies are different, diversity is different. Do you really see a scope, over there? Because as we discussed initially, a lot of fintechs build a very different value. Obviously, DPI innovation is good, no doubt about it, but they projected a very different picture than what the reality is. Do you think that then this fintech, this kind of value, will be able to, whether they will be able to generate the value outside?
This is a good question. I think, again, the last decade has showed us that a large global payment firm cannot replicate the global model into a local country. Localization by design is again winning. I think we all have learned the hard way that if you're not local to a particular country, if you're not centered and focused on winning that country, a global firm will never win. And that is where local players, especially if you look at the Southeast Asia geographies, a local player is the market leader in every single geography you pick up. Now, why is that happening? Because the answer is not that the global firms don't solve quickly enough. They don't understand the local nuances, and they're not willing to invest as much money. See, when you look at a business case for why somebody should invest in these countries, we are still very poor when it comes to countries like, say, UK, Europe, as well as the US and Australia. The top 5 payment markets in the world are all very rich countries. They pay for services. But you would be surprised to know that in Indonesia, where I spent a significant amount of time recently, people are willing to pay for services because they see value. We often, sitting in our glass ivory towers, I know a lot of product builders are to be blamed for that, can be blamed for the fact that we overlook what we are selling. But when you talk to people on the ground, we are selling them Kool-Aid that they don't want. So if you tell a woman to do a video KYC, when in certain countries you are supposed to wear a headscarf, it becomes very difficult for the person to actually follow the digital onboarding model. She'd much rather have somebody come home, do the KYC and go back. So the physical KYC wins. But these are not things that we understand, because we look at other countries and how they have innovated, and then we solve for that. So I feel that the fintechs have also learned the lesson the very hard way, that innovating for a country means following local norms right to the T, and then looking at the infra or the platform as a separation with the UX experience, as well as, I would say, the customer. The customer is portable. You can't really take them, sorry, the customer is non-portable. You can't take them to countries, but the infra is. And that's where I feel the win is, which is where we've seen non-payment players make a big success. For example, Uber. They've gone to multiple countries, they've exited, and they still right now are a profitable company. I think we have a lot to learn from big tech and tech. I think fintech should be not looking at them as fintech, but essentially technology players. And the fin and the tech, I think, has gone back to the tech and the fin. That's one major change that has happened in the last few years.
So most of these growth stories, or the innovation stories, are based on the funds which came from the foreign land. Uh, why are the foreign investors bullish on India? Is it because of the dollar and the rupee combination? Because the rupee is obviously lower than the dollar, and if they want to invest, in the fintechs abroad, maybe when in any developed country, the ticket size is much higher. With the same ticket size, they can experiment with a lot of fintechs in India. Is that the reason that a lot of fintech investors, or maybe VC funds and general investors, are looking at India very aggressively?
I think I'd bet to disagree, because when you look at India, the last 10 years have also changed how India is seen by the world. Like, I've been in countries where I used to be asked which country do I represent. People knew about India in terms of snakes and cows. Now people are talking to me, even in a taxi, they talk to you about UPI. It is unbelievable in terms of the perception change that has happened, not just about Indians and technology, but about, we were always known as a services country exporting software engineers. Suddenly we are exporting technology, especially, which is changing lives. So the Jandhan stories that India doesn't seem to want to hear about are loved by people abroad. Because I'll give an example. When you have a country which has like 55 to 60% of the population unbanked, when they hear that you can open a bank account and you can receive money in a matter of seconds, I think it is a very huge example. So the IMF, World Bank have all recognized us, but I feel that the celebration component has been very low in India. It's celebrated very highly abroad. So that perception shift that has happened suddenly, I feel, has really helped India get the visibility right for the VC firms to come and invest. The second has been, I would say, the first wave of fintechs that came around. They created such a huge impact, whether it is the acceptance of QR as a payment method, whether it is the education of consumers. We cannot discount the fact that had it not been for the pre-demonetization and the post-demonetization era, we would not be sitting here. Because those companies actually did the groundwork to educate consumers. So today, when your helper or your illiterate helper or your driver is able to receive money, they are able to do it by the sound, they are able to do it by the numbers which they see on the screen without even reading. That is transformation. But again, the VCs are looking at India as a growth story from the perspective of returns. I was just talking to somebody who's very senior, been in the space for about 20 years. VCs have seen 100x to 200x returns if they've made a wise investment. The problem is that we're getting a lot of flack because the last 5 years have been complete aberration, where like XX returns have been expected in Series B and Series C, which cannot happen. I think that euphemism and that euphoria that was there suddenly has gone out of the system, and it went out so quickly. And then again, the correction happened in a way that the big techs have also taken a step back. So we shouldn't blame ourselves too much. But I feel fintech in India has taken a big rap because the expectation of the unicorn, decacorn, and suddenly that other cycle suddenly hit rock bottom when those numbers and the success didn't come through.
Sure, that was a detailed answer, Monica. Noted your points. My last question to you, specifically on the fintech side, and then I will ask one more specifically on the women and diversity. Is this that? So, number of fintechs are there. Regulators are also very active. Few of the fintechs have also managed to raise funds, during some time now. But when you look at broadly, many of them look like a replica of each other. Okay, a lot of fintech started with payment wallets. They almost followed the similar model. Now the rally has moved towards lending space. Who will make or who will generate the business value? Or do you see all these fintechs generating a business value, maybe going ahead? Do you see a future from them, or maybe consolidation will happen? How do you see the future of Indian fintechs going ahead?
I think the consolidation has already started. So the best player, the one that can actually take the brunt of this hard funding winter, will be the ones which will survive. I feel that this is a passing phase also. Whatever goes up has to come down, but whatever is going down has to come up. I think the sound business model, which is when you are hit really hard, that's when you tend to go down on your knees and still come back. I feel that India is very resilient. All of us as people are very resilient. So I feel that this time is coming up where the fintechs will suddenly start, and you'll start seeing consolidation in terms of tech. So if somebody does better tech than me, then I will use that tech instead of building my own. That change already happened. Secondly is business model being the key. Rather than depending and innovating on a new way of being able to create business and attracting consumers, every business and every vertical today starts off saying, where am I going to make money and is there money to be made? I think that fundamental shift, is there money to be made, is major. So if a fintech answers that question, then I think we are in for a long haul. The third would be serving customers. And I'm not talking about consumers here. I'm not talking about people like you and me. We're obviously sitting in a position of privilege. I'm talking about that end customer who really cares about the 2,000 rupees of salary coming into the bank account without failures. I'm talking about that small merchant, the chai wala, tea stall owner, celebrated in UPI success stories. But how do they make money? How do they get more footfall? How do they generate more capital? We are not solving for those, unfortunately, right now. But I feel that that's where the fintechs will suddenly start becoming what we are calling embedded finance players. You become a suite of service providers and provide services which people need. But then customizations are needed for your cohorts, which is again something that we are seeing happen. And the third would be, I would say, innovation growth stories that will come around because of new DPIs that are coming in. I still feel that credit and lending, no matter what is happening right now, with regulations being what they are, I still feel that there's a big hockey stick to be expected because people need credit. And we cannot discount the fact. But under the ring fenced approach that we want to build out, I feel that the next growth story has to come from this space.
Meaningful one, Monica. My last question is specifically about the diversity. What we expect generally is this, that since fintech is a new area and a new segment or a new business model which is emerging, diversity should be maintained compared to the traditional businesses. But we still see a lack of women participation, specifically in terms of the producer, in terms of the founders, the CEOs, or the product developments, or even the investors. You know, any reasons why, and what would be your suggestions, in fact, maybe if the fintechs or the investors community, to maintain this diversity?
I think this gets spoken about a lot, and we've spoken about it at at length in terms of why this is happening. Because India has been at the forefront of having women bankers lead the way in terms of CEO positions before this even became common. But suddenly we are seeing this very big downtick. It's reflective of the entire fact that a lot of women are leaving the workforce, especially in mid management positions or mid level positions, because it's hard to keep up. Post COVID world has suddenly changed a lot of things. I will not say that we should be looking at, all of those D, E, and I efforts are separate, but the reflection of what we are seeing in the workforce is what you're seeing. The second thing is that building in fintech is a very long game. And investors were very bullish on a couple of business models and how the stories are sold. Versus, I feel that with women, they're very realistic in their approach. They're selling of what they're building, and therefore what they want to solve for are longer term growth stories. When we move into a phase where growth is replaced by business and profitability, I feel women builders, you will start seeing a lot more of them. Right now, with the euphoria that is there, it's about getting 100x returns. But when you create either for women or you want women to create, you have to be more realistic, because those women who are building out are very realistic, they're very experienced in their art. They're not going to sell you a story, they will actually give you a profitable business. And I would actually urge a lot of women, especially if you're thinking about leaving the workforce or switching over. Fintech is very hard because of two reasons. Number one is compliance. Number two, compliance and regulation together. You're always working the clock because you have to comply and at the same time keep innovating. Unlike other industries that are not very heavily regulated, one single challenge, one single problem can lead to a business shutting down. We've seen examples of that. So when you are working in that high pressure environment, it's not about generating returns then. It's also about always constantly being on this cycle. And I think that becomes very hard as you start creating. And third, but not, I think it's a reflection of our society. While India is changing, I hope that we are able to solve for this with Gen Zs and the millennials being completely unafraid. The women are completely unafraid to take on risk. But more than them taking risk, I think the people who are evaluating whether they should be giving that risk and passing on that risk by investing in them need to change their perspective by talking to a lot more women builders, as well as people who are interested in building for India or building for the world actually.
Thank you so much, Monica, for all these details and being part of this show. Thank you.
Thank you for finally inviting me to your show.
Thank you. And thank you so much for watching FinTech Diary on etbfsi.com. Thank you so much.